Hey everybody, what's happening? I'm Adam, this is Go To Outdoors, and I'd like to welcome you back to another one. Today what I have for you is a recipe that you can prepare ahead of time, put in the freezer, just so you have it on hand for when you're ready to put in some of that wild game you harvest this fall. The first part of this recipe that you're going to need to get started while you're doing everything else is going to be actually the broth. I don't have any beef stock on hand. You can use chicken stock, you can use other things like that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple of these bullion cubes. One of these is good for 2 cups of water, so I have 2 of these right down here and they're ready to go. And I also do have my 4 cups of water on hand, so I'm going to get that popped into here real quick, get this started up. So first things first, we got to talk about the star of the show today. And those are 3 types of chilies. You're going to have your pasilla chilies, you're going to have your ancho chilies, and you're also going to have some guajillo chilies. For this recipe today, I've got 4 of each. So first thing you got to do is you got to make sure you split them up and you take the seeds out. So let me break these down. So first thing you're going to want to do is take the tops off of these. Then I like to have something on hand, as you can see right here, just so you can have a place to put all of the seeds and all the insides that you're going to be taking out. Because you do not want any of the seeds in this recipe. It doesn't hurt anything flavor-wise, but you really don't want the texture of the seeds to be getting into what you're cooking, because, yeah, they're dry, they're hard. It's kind of like having a little bit of rind in every bite, and you don't want that. So we take that out of here. You may have seen some versions of this recipe online where people actually go ahead and steep their chilies in broth or in water before they take the seeds out. I don't like doing that. I feel like it comes out a bit easier if you take care of that before you split your peppers up and your chilies up and put them into the broth. So that's why I do this step first. And it's okay if you rip them up a little bit just to get some of the seeds out, because in the end, they're all going to be going into a blender. So we'll kind of take care of that for itself. And some of these will be a little bit stickier inside than others. And on that note, I do want to mention one thing. When you go to the store and you buy these dried peppers, you want them really pliable. You want them to have some kind of life left to them. You don't want ones that are totally dry, kind of sound like a maraca when you shake them around. Because what you're looking for in these are the oils that pretty much give you all the flavor you have. And that's important for a step that comes after this, but we'll get to that here in a second. Sorry in advance if you hear my little dog whining in the background. She wants attention right now, and I can't give it to her because I'm doing a video trying to help you. Broth is starting to boil. The bouillon's starting to dissolve. Going to bring that up to a boil, make sure all those bullion cubes are completely disintegrated into that liquid, and then take it off the heat and set it aside, because we will be needing that. And like I said, it's kind of okay if you want to tear these open just so you can get out some of these little pithy parts, like that right there, because they do nothing for the flavor, and they just affect the texture in the long run. On a side note, I do want to mention that I kind of like this part because when you're peeling the anchos and the pasillas, they smell like really good raisins with a bit of heat. So I don't know, just a good flavor, good scent to help you along when you're cooking. Because after all, flavors and smells is a lot of times why we cook, because it just makes the house smell good. The guajillos are kind of important because they are the ones that are going to be giving you that really good red color. Alright, now that I'm making all kinds of noise, shaking things around, whatever, I did get out the big pan. As you can see on the smaller camera here on the GoPro, I did put this on. I'm getting it a little bit warm. I do have it on low heat. I have moved my broth over to a small burner with low heat as well, just to keep it going. If you're not sure that the bullion cubes have gotten completely disintegrated in there, dissolved into the liquid, just go ahead and give it a stir. You shouldn't feel any resistance. You should not see anything kind of floating around in there. That should be good to go. So it's on low heat just to keep it warm for the next step. But the next step, of course, is we're going to be go ahead tearing these up a little bit more. Tear up your chilies into smaller, manageable pieces. And then you're throwing them onto the hot pan here, because what we want to do is toast them to get a little bit more flavor, kind of get the oils woken up on these chilies. Because that is basically where you get all the flavor in your chili. The final result. That one didn't have all the seeds out of it, so let me take those out. It's okay if a couple seeds get into your mix, so to say, just because, again, like I said before, these are going to be going into a blender at the end to try and get everything broken down into one big piece, or one solid gooey recipe. Just give everything a rough tear. Smaller pieces are better, just because in the long run they're gonna, be more evenly toasted with the heat, and they will also blend faster once you get it into the blender itself. You're gonna want to keep an eye on this. You don't want it to be on too high a heat, because it is easy to burn these, and that is not what you want. You don't want any burned, harsh, acrid flavors in the final result. Start to smell it already. Now you're probably thinking, I'm putting chilies over heat. Is this going to make my eyes burn? Is it going to make me sneeze? Is this going to be bad? No. These ones, there's not really a lot of heat in them. The guajillos are going to have the most heat of the three, but they're not really that overpowering. Mostly what they add is just a little bit of liveliness, a little sharpness. Nothing like the kind of heat you get out of a cayenne or something else like that. So, I'll just keep these stirred around. Give them a flip. Let them toast for a couple minutes here. Smells like smoky raisins at this point. As you can see on this piece, we've got a little bit of char, a little bit of smokiness starting. It smells really, really nice. So we're just toasting them. We're not roasting. We're not blackening these by any measure. We're just going to try and get a little bit of flavor out of them. So now that these are kind of getting there, I'm going to shut that heat off. Shut that heat completely off. And now we're going to be popping these into the broth. So that's what we're going to do now. Turn that heat off. Just get these into that hot liquid. And let's just knock the seeds that are left over into there as well. You're going to want to try and get those as submerged as you can. And no more heat at this point. Just keep them there, in there, soaking. Get those covered up. And you're going to want to let those sit at this point for 30 minutes. Okay, so I do have my 30-minute timer started. And while that's working, there's still a couple things we can work on. So let's get to that. Okay, now we are at the point, and I'm waving a knife around. My bad. Anyway, we're at the point right now, while the peppers are steeping in the beef broth, we're going to be going through the next section here. And of course, that means breaking down a couple more ingredients. So what I have here is one small onion. You're probably going to want, between 3/4 and a cup worth of chopped onion when you're done. This is a little bit less than 3/4, I assume, once I get this processed out. And recipe called for 3 cloves of garlic. I put in 4 because they're kind of small cloves. So let's get these broken down. And yes, I realize I'm not doing this with a chef's knife, I'm doing this with a carving knife, but this is the sharpest knife I have in the house right now, so that's why I'm using it. And you want to get a good mince on these garlic. Doesn't need to be too fine because, again, like the other stuff, it's going to be going into a blender. And the garlic is kind of optional. You do need some to get the flavor in this dish, but you don't need to use all of it. I just tend to like it. And I know it does actually get better the longer it's all incorporated, so that's why I put in the extra clove. It's not going to hurt you. Not really going to overpower anything else too much either. The chilies, they bring a lot of punch to the table in this recipe. Yep, doesn't need to be perfect. I am not a professional chef. My knife skills do need some work still. But you get good enough. Of course, you break down the onion. Doesn't need to be too rough or too fine a dice. Now at this point, we're kind of at an optional step. You could saute or roast these peppers or the onions off at this point. I'm not going to this time. I've tried that before and it didn't really add too much, in my opinion, to the final result. And I kind of wanted that more bold, oniony kind of essence in my recipe anyway. It does cook out eventually, but it just seems like if you roast them or you saute them down to caramelize them first, that you do lose something there. So now that the onion and the garlic are chopped up, you just kind of get them into the same pile here. Just go ahead and set that aside in a bowl for itself. And I'm making a mess. Okay, to go along with the chilies and the onion and the garlic, you're going to need a few more dry ingredients as well. And the first one of those is going to be 2 teaspoons of salt. Kosher salt you can use. I like to use sea salt. I've also used Himalayan pink salt. You don't really get too much of a difference in flavor between the three, so I just use sea salt because it's always available. Okay. It's about 1.5-ish, and maybe 1 1/3. And we'll say that makes up the second one to make up for it. So there's your 2 teaspoons of salt. You're going to need 2 teaspoons of ground cumin. And there's a little bit jumped ahead of that. Never comes out easily. And there's some more in there, so we'll count that as the first. And this will make up the second. Get out of there. Yeah, close enough. A little extra cumin is not going to hurt you. That's why I can't have nice things. Next thing you're going to need is a teaspoon of oregano. This is just plain old vanilla regular oregano. You can use Mexican oregano. It's up to you. But you just need 1 teaspoon of it. Get a little bit extra, not going to hurt you. That goes into the mix. And the last of the dried ingredients is, of course, going to be your plain old black cracked pepper. So you're going to need 1 teaspoon of that. And again, a little bit extra. It's not going to hurt you. Let me throw in some more, just a dash more, just for kicks. At this point, the only thing we're still waiting on is for the chilies to finish steeping in that beef broth, and then we're going to be throwing everything in the blender. So right now, we've got about 18.5 minutes left. So I'll get back with you when that's done. And here we have it. The alarm, the timer is ready for the chilies to be done. Dog's whining, sorry. I can't take her anywhere. So let's have a look at these chilies now. So here's what we have. That's what everything looks like at this point. Everything has got a nice consistency. They're nice and pliable. And of course you have all that broth in there as well. So let's get this into our blender. Okay, so obviously the first thing we have to do is put in a little bit of avocado oil. Just a dash, probably about 2 tablespoons worth or so, not too much. I just like to put in a little bit down at the bottom. Get things all slicked up. Then put in the onions and the garlic. It tends to stick, so make sure you get it in there. The liquid part tends to be a little bit cantankerous on the chilies. I'm pouring out of something like this, so just be careful. See that color coming out of there. Looking good, looking good. And then just make sure everything gets in there. And you might notice a lot of the seeds stay on the bottom, so call it a win. And the very last, of course, make sure you have a little bit of liquid up on the top. We put in all of our dry ingredients that we mixed together. Everything right on top. And of course, all that's left to do is blend it. Make sure you put a cap on top of this just because it could get messy. Turn it up on full speed, pulse it at first. Then when you think it's ready to go, just blend the snot out of it. Like to open it up, make sure everything's kind of mixing up the right way. Pushed around some of the bigger portions that might slick up on the top. Give it a taste. Fantastic. And keep blending. And this is what you should be left with. Come on, lid. Of course, it tends to make a mess in there, but nice, deep red, awesome chili base. And yeah, it's fantastic. At this point, if you wanted to, you could add a little bit of salt, or you could just leave it the way it is. I think it's good just the way it is, so I'm not going to touch anything. I'm probably going to end up making another batch or two of this before I go out and do any more hunting this year, just because I think this would be really, really good with venison. I've had it with beef before. I think it would be really good with any dark meat, any darker red meat. Pork, it would probably be fantastic as well. But those recipes are for another video. Today, like I said, all I wanted to do was show you how to make a great base. So let's get the chili portioned out and we'll be good to go. Give me 1 second. This will store, of course, in any kind of container that you have on hand. But what I have is just some old soup. Deer. Sorry about that, folks. I mentioned deer, and as soon as I said it, venison, the dogs saw what they wanted, so they started barking, but just like that. Anyway, get these portioned out. Like I said, if you have any container on hand, I like to use these old, Chinese soup containers just because I tend to have those on the regular. And they're cheap and easy and they store things well. So let's get that portioned out. Almost sounds like you're pouring a good cup of coffee. But that is the color we are looking for. Darker red and kind of a consistency of, kind of like a good smoothie consistency. All right, so after today's recipe, this is what we ended up with. Of course, if you're going to be throwing anything into it later, you can cut this with a little bit of water. That way it'll reduce back down once you have your meat or whatever else you put into here stewing down. Works great in a slow cooker, works great in a braise. If you want to throw this onto something, you sear off some meat first, you throw it into a Dutch oven, and then you put it in the oven for a few more hours. Braise it down, makes everything super tender, super tasty. So that's actually what I'm going to be trying when I get some game meat later in the season here. The other thing, got a little bit left over in this one container. Doubles as a fantastic dip for chips. If you wanted to throw anything else on there. You can even use this as a topper for side dishes if you want to. You can add a little bit more salt. This one I don't like too salty. I have made it before and you season a little bit extra during the whole process. It just comes out a little bit heavy on the salt. So keep it however you want. If you like that, go ahead and keep adding the salt. I like to keep it a little bit more kind of natural with the flavors of everything that's there. I still have 2 teaspoons of salt in here, so it's not like there's none. I just don't like to go any farther than that. But there you have it. Plain and simple, quick and dirty chili Colorado that you can use for any kind of meat, any kind of game meat, or anything else you might get at the grocery store. And go ahead and freeze some for later. I don't know how long it will keep in the freezer. I've had some frozen for about 2 weeks before, and it turned out just fine. But that said, experiment. Do whatever you feel like. If you've made this before, or if you have any comments or questions about how I did this, feel free to leave those in the comments down below. And that's pretty much all I got for you today. Like I always say, thanks again for watching. Make sure you find a reason to smile today, and I'll catch you in the next one.